The Stand by Stephen King. Prologue. The circle opens. We need help, the poet reckoned. Edward Dorn. Sally. A mutter. Wake up now, Sally. A louder mutter. Leave me alone. He shook her harder. Wake up, you gotta wake up. Charlie's voice, calling her. For how long? Sally swam up out of sleep. First she glanced at the clock on the night table and saw it was 2:15 in the morning. Charlie shouldn't even be here. He should be on shift. Then she got her first good look at him and something leaped up inside her, some deadly intuition. Her husband was deathly pale. His eyes started and bulged from their sockets. The car keys were in one hand. He was still using the other to shake her, although her eyes were open. It was as if he hadn't been able to register the fact that she was awake. Charlie, what is it? What's wrong? He didn't seem to know what to say. His Adam's apple bobbed futilely, but there was no sound in the small service bungalow but the ticking of the clock. Is it a fire? She asked stupidly. It was the only thing she could think of which might have put him in such a state. She knew his parents had perished in a house fire. In a way, he said. In a way, it's worse. You gotta get dressed, honey. Get baby Levon. We gotta get out of here. Why? She asked, getting out of bed. Dark fear had seized her. Nothing seemed right. This was like a dream. Where, you mean the backyard? But she knew it wasn't the backyard. She had never seen Charlie look afraid like this. She drew a deep breath and could smell no smoke or burning. Sally, honey, don't ask questions. We have to get away. Far away. You just go get baby Levon and get her dressed. But is there time to pack? This seemed to stop him, to derail him somehow. She thought she was as afraid as she could be, but apparently she wasn't. She recognized that what she had taken for fright on his part was closer to raw panic. He ran a distracted hand through his hair and replied, I don't know, I'll have to test the wind. And he left her with this bizarre statement which meant nothing to her, left her standing cold and afraid and disoriented in her bare feet and baby doll nightie. It was as if he had gone mad. What did testing the wind have to do with whether or not she had time to pack? And where was far away? Reno, Vegas, Salt Lake City, and... She put her hand against her throat as a new idea struck her. AWOL. Leaving in the middle of the night meant Charlie was planning to go AWOL. She went into the small room which served as baby Levon's nursery and stood for a moment, indecisive, looking at the sleeping infant in her pink blanket suit. She held to the faint hope that this might be no more than an extraordinarily vivid dream. It would pass, she would wake up at 7 in the morning just like usual, feed baby Levon and herself while she watched the first hour of the Today Show, and be cooking Charlie's eggs when he came off shift at 8 a.m., his nightly tour in the reservation's North Tower over for another night. And in 2 weeks he would be back on days and not so cranky, and if he was sleeping with her at night she wouldn't have crazy dreams like this one and... Hurry it up, he hissed at her, breaking her faint hope. We got just time to throw a few things together, but for Christ's sake, woman, if you love her... He pointed at the crib. You get her dressed! He coughed nervously into his hand and began to yank things out of the bureau drawers and pile them helter-skelter into a couple of old suitcases. She woke up baby Levon, soothing the little one as best she could. The 3-year-old was cranky and bewildered at being awakened in the middle of the night, and she began to cry as Sally got into her underpants, a blouse, and a romper. The sound of the child's crying made her more afraid than ever. She associated it with the other times baby Levon, usually the most angelic of babies, had cried in the night. Diaper rash, teething, croup, colic. Fear slowly changed to anger as she saw Charlie almost run past the door with a double handful of her own underwear. Bra straps trailed out behind him like the streamers from New Year's Eve noisemakers. He flung them into one of the suitcases and slammed it shut. The hem of her best slip hung out, and she just bet it was torn. What is it? She cried, and the distraught tone of her voice caused baby Levon to burst into fresh tears just as she was winding down to sniffles. Have you gone crazy? They'll send soldiers after us, Charlie. Soldiers! Not tonight they won't, he said, and there was something so sure in his voice that it was horrible. "Point is, Sugar Babe, if we don't get our asses in gear, we ain't never gonna make it off in the base. I don't even know how in the hell I got out of the tower. Malfunctioned somewhere, I guess. Why not? Everything else sure God malfunctioned." And he uttered a high, loon-like laugh that frightened her more than anything else had done. "The baby dressed? Good. Put some of her clothes in that other suitcase. Use the blue tote bag in the closet for the rest. Then we're going to get the hell out. I think we're all right. Wind's blowing east to west. Thank God for that." He coughed into his hand again. "Daddy," Baby Levon demanded, holding her arms up. "Want Daddy, sure. Horsey ride, Daddy. Horsey ride, sure." "Not now," Charlie said, and disappeared into the kitchen. A moment later, Sally heard the rattle of crockery. He was getting her pin money out of the blue soup dish on the top shelf. Some $30 or $40 she had put away. $1, sometimes 50 cents, at a time. Her house money. It was real, then. Whatever it was really real. Baby Levon, denied her horsey ride by her daddy, who rarely if ever denied her anything, began to weep again. Sally struggled to get into her light jacket and then threw most of her clothes into the tote, cramming them in helter-skelter. The idea of putting anything else into the other suitcase was ridiculous. It would burst. She had to kneel on it to snap the catches. She found herself thanking God Baby Levon was trained, and there was no need to bother with diapers. Charlie came back into the bedroom, and now he was running. He was still stuffing the crumpled ones and fives from the soup dish into the front pocket of his suntans. Sally scooped Baby Levon up. She was fully awake now, and she could walk perfectly well, but Sally wanted her in her arms. She bent and snagged the tote bag. "Where are we going, Daddy?" Baby Levon asked. "I was a-sleeping." "Baby can be a-sleepin' in the car," Charlie said, grabbing the two suitcases. The hem of Sally's slip flapped. His eyes still had that white, starey look. An idea, a growing certainty, began to dawn in Sally's mind. "Was there an accident?" she whispered. "Oh, Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, there wasn't there? An accident out there." "I was playing solitaire," he said. "I looked up and saw the clock had gone from green to red. I turned on the monitor. Sally, they're all—" He paused, looked at Baby Levon's eyes, wide and, although still rimmed with tears, curious. "They're all DEAD down there," he said. "All but one or two, and they're probably gone now." "What's DED, Daddy?" Baby Levon asked. "Never mind, honey," Sally said. Her voice seemed to come to her from down a very long canyon. Charlie swallowed. Something clicked in his throat. "Everything's supposed to maglock if the clock goes red. They got a Chubb computer that runs the whole place, and it's supposed to be fail-safe. I saw what was on the monitor, and I jumped out the door. I thought the goddamn thing would cut me in half. It should have shut the second the clock went red, and I don't know how long it was red before I looked up and noticed it. But I was almost to the parking lot before I heard it thump shut behind me. Still, if I'd looked up even 30 seconds later, I'd be shut up in that tower control room right now, like a bug in a bottle." "What is it? What—" "I don't know. I don't want to know. All I know is that it KILLED them quick. If they want me, they'll have to catch me. I was getting hazard pay, but they ain't paying me enough to hang around here. Wind's blowing west. We're driving east. Come on now." Still feeling half asleep, caught in some awful grinding dream, she followed him out to the driveway where their 15-year-old Chevy stood, quietly rusting in the fragrant desert darkness of the California night. Charlie dumped the suitcases in the trunk and the tote bag in the back seat. Sally stood for a moment by the passenger door with the baby in her arms, looking at the bungalow where they had spent the last 4 years. When they had moved in, she reflected, Baby Levon was still growing inside her body, all her horsey rides ahead of her. "Come on," he said. "Get in, woman." She did. He backed out, the Chevy's headlights momentarily splashing across the house. The reflection in the windows looked like the eyes of some hunted beast. He was hunched tensely over the steering wheel, his face drawn in the dim glow of the dashboard instruments. "If the base gates are closed, I'm going to try to crash through." And he meant it. She could tell. Suddenly her knees felt watery. But there was no need for such desperate measures. The base gates were standing open. One guard was nodding over a magazine. She couldn't see the other. Perhaps he was in the head. This was the outer part of the base, a conventional army vehicle depot. What went on at the hub of the base was of no concern to these fellows. I looked up and saw the clock had gone red. She shivered and put her hand on his leg. Baby Levon was sleeping again. Charlie patted her hand briefly and said, "It's going to be all right, hon." By dawn, they were running east across Nevada, and Charlie was coughing steadily. Captain Trips, June 16th to July 4th, 1990. Chapter 1. Hapscomb's Texaco sat on number 93 just north of Arnett, a puissant 4th-Street burg about 110 miles from Houston. Tonight the regulars were there, sitting by the cash register, drinking beer, talking idly, watching the bugs flying into the big lighted sign. It was Bill Hapscomb's station, so the others deferred to him even though he was a pure fool. They would have expected the same deferral if they had been gathered together in one of their business establishments, except they had none. In Arnett, it was hard times. In 1980, the town had had two industries, a factory that made paper products, for picnics and barbecues, mostly, and a plant that made electronic calculators. Now the paper factory was shut down and the calculator plant was ailing. They could make them a lot cheaper in Taiwan, it turned out, just like those portable TVs and transistor radios. Norman Brewitt and Tommy Wanamaker, who had both worked in the paper factory, were on relief, having run out of unemployment some time ago. Henry Carmichael and Stu Redman both worked at the calculator plant but rarely got more than 30 hours a week. Victor Palfrey was retired and smoked stinking home-rolled cigarettes, which were all he could afford. "Know what I say is this," Hap told them, putting his hands on his knees and leaning forward. "They just gotta say screw this inflation shit, screw this national debt shit. We got the presses and we got the paper. We're gonna run off $50 million bills and hump them right the Christ into circulation." Palfrey, who had been a machinist until 1984, was the only one present with sufficient self-respect to point out Hap's most obvious damn fool statements. Now, rolling another of his shitty-smelling cigarettes, he said, "That wouldn't get us nowhere. If they do that, it'll be just like Richmond in the last 2 years of the States War. In those days, when you wanted a piece of gingerbread, you gave the banker a Confederate dollar, he'd put it on the gingerbread and cut out a piece just that size. Money's just paper, you know." "I know some people don't agree with you," Hap said sourly. He picked up a greasy red plastic paper holder from his desk. "I owe these people, and they're starting to get pretty itchy about it." Stuart Redman, who was perhaps the quietest man in Arnett, was sitting in one of the cracked plastic Woolco chairs, a can of Pabst in his hand, looking out the big service station window at number 93. Stu knew about poor. He had grown up that way right here in town, the son of a dentist who had died when Stu was 7, leaving his wife and 2 other children besides Stu. His mother had gotten work at the Red Ball truck stop just outside of Arnett. Stu could have seen it from where he sat right now if it hadn't burned down in 1979. It had been enough to keep the 4 of them eating, but that was all. At the age of 9, Stu had gone to work, first for Rog Tucker, who owned the Red Ball, helping to unload trucks after school for 35 cents an hour, and then at the stockyards in the neighboring town of Braintree, lying about his age to get 20 back-breaking hours of labor a week at the minimum wage. Now, listening to Hap and Vic Palfrey argue on about money and the mysterious way it had of drying up, he thought about the way his hands had bled at first from pulling the endless hand trucks of hides and guts. He had tried to keep that from his mother, but she had seen, less than a week after he started. She wept over them a little, and she hadn't been a woman who wept easily. But she hadn't asked him to quit the job. She knew what the situation was. She was a realist. Some of the silence in him came from the fact that he had never had friends, or the time for them. There was school, and there was work. His youngest brother, Dev, had died of pneumonia the year he began at the yards, and Stu had never quite gotten over that. Guilt, he supposed. He had loved Dev the best. But his passing had also meant there was one less mouth to feed. In high school he had found football, and that was something his mother had encouraged even though it cut into his work hours. "You play," she said. "If you got a ticket out of here, it's football, Stuart. You play. Remember Eddie Warfield?" Eddie Warfield was a local hero. He had come from a family even poorer than Stu's own, had covered himself with glory as quarterback of the regional high school team, had gone on to Texas A&M with an athletic scholarship, and had played for 10 years with the Green Bay Packers, mostly as a second-string quarterback, but on several memorable occasions as the starter. Eddie now owned a string of fast food restaurants across the West and Southwest, and in Arnett he was an enduring figure of myth. In Arnett, when you said success, you meant Eddie Warfield. Stu was no quarterback, and he was no Eddie Warfield. But it did seem to him as he began his junior year in high school that there was at least a fighting chance for him to get a small athletic scholarship. And then there were work-study programs, and the school's guidance counselor had told him about the NDEA loan program. Then his mother had gotten sick, had become unable to work. It was cancer. 2 months before he graduated from high school, she had died, leaving Stu with his brother Bryce to support. Stu had turned down the athletic scholarship and had gone to work in the calculator factory. And finally it was Bryce, 3 years Stu's junior, who had made it out. He was now in Minnesota, a systems analyst for IBM. He didn't write often, and the last time he had seen Bryce was at the funeral, after Stu's wife had died of exactly the same sort of cancer that had killed his mother. He thought that Bryce might have his own guilt to carry, and that Bryce might be a little ashamed of the fact that his brother had turned into just another good old boy in a dying Texas town, spending his days doing time in the calculator plant, and his nights either down at Haps or over at the Indian Head drinking Lone Star beer. The marriage had been the best time, and it had only lasted 18 months. The womb of his young wife had borne a single dark and malignant child. That had been 4 years ago. Since, he had thought of leaving Arnett, searching for something better, but small-town inertia held him. The low siren song of familiar places and familiar faces. He was well liked in Arnett, and Vic Palfrey had once paid him the ultimate compliment of calling him old-time tough. As Vic and Hap chewed it out, there was still a little dusk left in the sky, but the land was in shadow. Cars didn't go by on 93 much now, which was one reason that Hap had so many unpaid bills. But there was a car coming now, Stu saw. It was still a quarter of a mile distant, the day's last light putting a dusty shine on what little chrome was left to it. Stu's eyes were sharp, and he made it as a very old Chevrolet, maybe a 75, a Chevy, no lights on, doing no more than 15 miles an hour, weaving all over the road. No one had seen it yet but him. "Now let's say you got a mortgage payment on this station," Vic was saying, "and let's say it's $50 a month." "It's a hell of a lot more than that." "Well, for the sake of the argument, let's say 50, and let's say the Federals went ahead and printed you a whole carload of money. Well, then those bank people would turn round and want 150. You'd be just as poorly off." "That's right," Henry Carmichael added. Hap looked at him, irritated. He happened to know that Hank had gotten in the habit of taking cokes out of the machine without paying the deposit, and furthermore, Hank knew he knew, and if Hank wanted to come in on any side, it ought to be his. "That ain't necessarily how it would be," Hap said weightily from the depths of his 9th-grade education. He went on to explain why. Stu, who only understood that they were in a hell of a pinch, tuned Hap's voice down to a meaningless drone and watched the Chevy pitch and yaw its way on up the road. The way it was going, Stu didn't think it was going to make it much farther. It crossed the white line, and its left-hand tires spumed up dust from the left shoulder. Now it lurched back, held its own lane briefly, then nearly pitched off into the ditch. Then, as if the driver had picked out the big lighted Texaco station sign as a beacon, it arrowed toward the tarmac like a projectile whose velocity is very nearly spent. Stu could hear the worn-out thump of its engine now. The steady gurgle and wheeze of a dying carb and a loose set of valves. It missed the lower entrance and bumped up over the curb. The fluorescent bars over the pumps were reflecting off the Chevy's dirt-streaked windshield, so it was hard to see what was inside, but Stu saw the vague shape of the driver roll loosely with the bump. The car showed no sign of slowing from its relentless 15. "So I say with more money in circulation you'd be—" "Better turn off your pumps, Hap," Stu said mildly. "The pumps? What?" Norm Brewitt had turned to look out the window. "Christ on a pony," he said. Stu got out of his chair, leaned over Tommy Wanamaker and Hank Carmichael, and flicked off all 8 switches at once, 4 with each hand. So he was the only one who didn't see the Chevy as it hit the gas pumps on the upper island and sheared them off. It plowed into them with a slowness that seemed implacable and somehow grand. Tommy Wanamaker swore in the Indian Head the next day that the taillights never flashed once. The Chevy just kept coming at a steady 15 or so, like the pace car in the Tournament of Roses parade. The undercarriage screeched over the concrete island, and when the wheels hit it, everyone but Stu saw the driver's head swing limply and strike the windshield, starring the glass. The Chevy jumped like an old dog that had been kicked and plowed away the high-test pump. It snapped off and rolled away, spilling a few dribbles of gas. The nozzle came unhooked and lay glittering under the fluorescence. They all saw the sparks produced by the Chevy's exhaust pipe grating across the cement, and Hap, who had seen a gas station explosion in Mexico, instinctively shielded his eyes against the fireball he expected. Instead, the Chevy's rear end flirted around and fell off the pump island on the station side. The front end smashed into the low lead pump, knocking it off with a hollow bang. Almost deliberately, the Chevrolet finished its 360-degree turn, hitting the island again, broadside this time. The rear end popped up on the island and knocked the regular gas pump asprawl, and there the Chevy came to a rest, trailing its rusty exhaust pipe behind it. It had destroyed all 3 of the gas pumps on that island nearest the highway. The motor continued to run choppily for a few seconds and then quit. The silence was so loud it was alarming. "Holy moly," Tommy Wanamaker said breathlessly. "Will she blow, Hap? If it was gonna, it already woulda," Hap said, getting up. His shoulder bumped the map case, scattering Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona every which way. Hap felt a curious sort of jubilation. His pumps were insured, and the insurance was paid up. Mary had harped on the insurance ahead of everything. "Guy must have been pretty drunk," Norm said. "I seen his taillights," Tommy said, his voice high. Norm said, "I seen his taillights," Tommy said, his voice high with excitement. "They never flashed once. Holy moly, if he'd been doing 60, we'd all be dead now." They hurried out of the office, Hap first and Stu bringing up the rear. Hap, Tommy, and Norm reached the car together. They could smell gas and hear the slow, clock-like tick of the Chevy's cooling engine. Hap opened the driver's side door, and the man behind the wheel spilled out like an old laundry shack. "God damn!" Norm Brewitt shouted, almost screamed. He turned away, clutched at his ample belly, and was sick. It wasn't the man who had fallen out. Hap had caught him neatly before he could thump to the pavement, but the smell that was issuing from the car, a sick stench compounded of blood, fecal matter, vomit, and human decay. It was a ghastly, rich, sick dead smell. A moment later, Hap turned away, dragging the driver by the armpits. Tommy hastily grabbed the dragging feet, and he and Hap carried him into the office. In the glow of the overhead fluorescence, their faces were cheesy-looking and revolted. Hap had forgotten about his insurance money. The others looked into the car, and then Hank turned away, one hand over his mouth, little fingers sticking off like a man who has just raised his wine glass to make a toast. He trotted to the north end of the station's lot and let his supper come up. Vic and Stu looked into the car for some time, looked at each other, and then looked back in. On the passenger side was a young woman, her shift dress hiked up high on her thighs. Leaning against her was a boy or girl, about 3 years old. They were both dead. Their necks had swelled up like inner tubes, and the flesh there was a purple-black color, like a bruise. The flesh was puffed up under the eyes, too. They looked, Vic later said, like those baseball players who put lamp black under their eyes to cut the glare. Their eyes bulged sightlessly. The woman was clutching the child's hand. Thick mucus had run from their noses and was now clotted there. Flies buzzed around them, lighting in the mucus, crawling in and out of their open mouths. Stu had been in the war, but he had never seen anything so terribly pitiful as this. His eyes were constantly drawn back to those linked hands. He and Vic backed away together and looked blankly at each other. Then they turned to the station. They could see Hap, jawing frantically into the payphone. Norm was walking toward the station behind them, throwing glances at the wreck over his shoulder. The Chevy's driver's side door stood sadly open. There was a pair of baby shoes dangling from the rear-view mirror. Hank was standing by the door, rubbing his mouth with a dirty handkerchief. "Jesus, Stu," he said unhappily, and Stu nodded. Hap hung up the phone. The Chevy's driver was lying on the floor. "Ambulance will be in here in 10 minutes. Do you figure they're..." He jerked his thumb at the Chevy. "They're dead, okay?" Vic nodded. His lined face was yellow pale, and he was sprinkling tobacco all over the floor as he tried to make one of his shitty-smelling cigarettes. "They're the 2 deadest people I've ever seen." He looked at Stu, and Stu nodded, putting his hands in his pockets. He had the butterflies. The man on the floor moaned thickly in his throat, and they all looked down at him. After a moment, when it became obvious that the man was speaking or trying very hard to speak, Hap knelt beside him. It was, after all, his station. Whatever had been wrong with the woman and child in the car was also wrong with this man. His nose was running freely, and his respiration had a peculiar undersea sound, a churning from somewhere in his chest. The flesh beneath his eyes was puffing, not black yet, but a bruised purple. His neck looked too thick, and the flesh had pushed up in a column to give him 2 extra chins. He was running a high fever. Being close to him was like squatting on the edge of an open barbecue pit where good coals have been laid. "The dog," he muttered. "Did you put him out?" "Mister," Hap said, shaking him gently, "I called the ambulance. You're going to be all right." "Clock went red," the man on the floor grunted, and then began to cough, racking chain-like explosions that sent heavy mucus spraying from his mouth in long and ropey splatters. Hap leaned backward, grimacing desperately. "Better roll him over," Vic said. He's going to choke on it." But before they could, the coughing tapered off into bellowed, uneven breathing again. His eyes blinked slowly, and he looked at the men gathered above him. "Where's this?" "Arnett," Hap said. "Bill Hapscomb's Texaco. You crashed out some of my pumps." And then, hastily, he added, "That's okay, they was insured." The man on the floor tried to sit up and was unable. He had to settle for putting a hand on Hap's arm. "My wife, my little girl." "They're fine," Hap said, grinning a foolish dog grin. "Seems like I'm awful sick," the man said. Breath came in and out of him in a thick, soft roar. "They were sick too, since we got up 2 days ago. Salt Lake City." His eyes flickered slowly closed. "Sick. Guess we didn't move quick enough after all." Far off, but getting closer, they could hear the whoop of the Arnett Volunteer Ambulance. "Man," Tommy Wanamaker said. "Oh, man." The sick man's eyes fluttered open again, and now they were filled with an intense, sharp concern. He struggled again to sit up. Sweat ran down his face. He grabbed Hap. "Are Sally and baby Levon all right?" he demanded. Spittle flew from his lips, and Hap could feel the man's burning heat radiating outward. The man was sick, half crazy. He stank. Hap was reminded of the smell an old dog blanket gets sometimes. "They're all right," he insisted, a little frantically. "You just lay down and take it easy, okay?" The man lay back down. His breathing was rougher now. Hap and Hank helped roll him over on his side, and his respiration seemed to ease a trifle. "I felt pretty good until last night," he said. "Coughing, but all right. Woke up with it in the night. Didn't get away quick enough. Is baby Levon okay?" The last trailed off into something none of them could make out. The ambulance siren warbled closer and closer. Stu went over to the window to watch for it. The others remained in a circle around the man on the floor. "What's you got, Vic? Any idea?" Hap asked. Vic shook his head. "Dunno." "Might have been something they ate," Norm Brewitt said. "That car's got a California plate. They was probably eating at a lot of roadside stands, you know. Maybe they got a poison hamburger. It happens." The ambulance pulled in and skirted the wrecked Chevy to stop between it and the station door. The red light on top made crazy sweeping circles. It was full dark now. "Give me your hand and I'll pull you up out of there!" the man on the floor cried suddenly, and then was silent. "Food poisoning," Vic said. "Yeah, that could be. I hope so, because—" "Because what?" Hank asked. "Because otherwise it might be something catching." Vic looked at them with troubled eyes. "I seen cholera back in 1958, down near Nogales, and it looked something like this." 3 men came in, wheeling a stretcher. "Hap," one of them said, "you're lucky you didn't get your scraggy ass blown to Kingdom Come." "This guy, huh?" They broke apart to let them through. Billy Veriker, Monty Sullivan, Carlos Ortega, men they all knew. "There's 2 folks in that car," Hap said, drawing Monty aside. "Woman and a little girl, both dead." "Holy crow, you sure?" "Yeah, this guy, he don't know. You going to take him to Braintree?" "I guess." Monty looked at him, bewildered. "What do I do with the 2 in the car? I don't know how to handle this, Hap." "Stu, you can call State Patrol. You mind if I ride in with you?" "Hell no." They got the man onto the stretcher, and while they ran him out, Hap went over to Stu. "I'm going to ride into Braintree with that guy. Would you call the State Patrol?" "Sure." "And Mary, too. Call and tell her what happened." "Okay." Hap trotted out to the ambulance and climbed in. Billy Veriker shut the doors behind him and then called the other 2. They had been staring into the wrecked Chevy with dread fascination. A few moments later the ambulance pulled out, siren warbling, red dome light pulsing blood shadows across the gas station's tarmac. Stu went to the phone and put a quarter in. The man from the Chevy died 20 miles from the hospital. He drew one final bubbling gasp, let it out, hitched in a smaller one, and just quit. Hap got the man's wallet out of his hip pocket and looked at it. There were $17 in cash. A California driver's license identified him as Charles D. Campion. There was an Army card, and pictures of his wife and daughter encased in plastic. Hap didn't want to look at the pictures. He stuffed the wallet back into the dead man's pocket and told Carlos to turn off the siren. It was 10 after 9.